not on. I just started recording. And I would like to welcome everybody again for the 2021 edition of our Grad Slam. And I'm so excited to hear your research. And maybe then if John doesn't have to go first, then we can start with Stephanie as we announce first. You can start whenever you're ready. And if you would like to share your screen, I think that should be okay. Great.
Oops. There we go. Okay. Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Stephanie Farrington, and I'm going to be sharing with you my research proposal for my project characterizing yellow lamp mussel habitat in the Connecticut River. So just a little bit of background information to start us off. The yellow lamp mussel is a freshwater mussel species. Freshwater mussels are one of the most rapidly declining taxa globally, and yellow lamp mussel are no exception. They are declining throughout their range, which extends from Georgia in the south up to Nova Scotia, Canada in the north. They are found in medium and large rivers throughout their range, as well as found in lakes only in Maine. They've been described in a variety of habitats throughout this range. Some have described them in strong currents and riffles, and others have described them in slower currents and sandbars. So as you can imagine, that makes it difficult to generalize about their habitat preferences, which is really important when designing conservation efforts for this declining species. Habitat is particularly important for freshwater mussels because they're incredibly sensitive to environmental conditions. They're actually often used as bioindicator species because they're so sensitive. And so this sensitivity can have a huge impact on their survival, particularly through conservation measures such as relocation prior to a disturbance, such as a dam removal or translocation of propagated mussels, reintroducing them into a new area. So that's where my project comes in. I have two main objectives. The first is to describe the habitat where yellow lamp mussel are currently found within the Connecticut River main stem. And the second is to identify additional suitable habitat for yellow lamp mussel in this area. So areas that are align with their preferences, but they're not currently located there. So these may be good target areas for reintroduction or translocation. So here is my study area. It's this 80-kilometer, about 50-mile stretch of the Connecticut River. It extends from the Windsor Locks in Connecticut up to Turner's Falls in Massachusetts. So this 80 kilometers is where yellow lamp mussel has been previously observed in the Connecticut River. Now here's where the GIS part comes in. So in order to collect this habitat data, I'll first need to map it using side scan sonar. So I will be dividing the Connecticut River, the study area, into transects of approximately 1 kilometer, and then driving along those transects in a boat and collecting sonar data. And the raw sonar data looks like this. So you can start to see some of the bed surface of the river. So this is the bottom of the river, the sand at the bottom. And so that allows us to collect this habitat data. And now we need to process it. So we have our raw sonar data, and I'll use SonarWiz to convert that into a file type that can be used in ArcMap. So we have now our raster mosaics. I'll then draw lines around different sediment types. So sand, gravel, cobble, identify those and then draw these lines around them. And then finally convert those into polygons, which I'll then categorize based on both the sediment type as well as the position within the river channel. But remember, this is supposed to be about yellow lamp mussel. So again, I have this raw sonar data, convert that into these different habitat types. using spatial analysis. But now we want to incorporate the muscle. So I will be identifying yellow lamp mussel presence and absence using existing state data from previous surveys and creating a habitat association map. So in this example, the areas in red are areas where yellow lamp mussel have been discovered and the habitat type that is associated with them. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there, there's a big red area where there's currently no yellow lamp mussel. So that would be a great area for potential reintroduction or translocation. And with that, I think I made it just under the 5-minute mark. So I just want to thank my research technicians, my partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as my partners at UMass and my funding sources. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the time. That was so great. And I think people have questions, but maybe we can just have the questions in general after all, if everybody agrees. Vicente?
Hello, everybody. I'll share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna start now. I'm Vicente Pereira Roa. I'm from Chile. I'm doing my master in geography. And last semester I had a class of with Seda about cartography and geovisualization. And the exercise that I decided to do for my final project was this New England renewables electric power plants visualization. Here you can see the final result. I shared the link of this map that I made in Tableau. You can play around in the map if you want. I'm gonna tell you a little about why I did do this and if I can go. Okay, so the main objective for me was generate an interactive visualization to be able to compare the renewable power plants in New England and the two main energy measure categories that I found, that was nameplate capacity in megawatts and net generation in megawatt hours. So for this, I used data from the US Energy and Information Administration service, specifically two surveys, the Form 923 and the Form 860, where I get from the first one, the net generation data, and for the second one, the location data and the nameplate capacity. What I do was try to select some of the columns of this data and join together with the spatial data that was showed in the form in the survey 860. And I joined this in Python. I fixed some details of the names in Excel. And then I opened all this in Tableau. That was my first experience with Tableau. I use for me, it was a friendly interface, interactive, great for do time visualization, but sadly a paid resource, but still good to know what we can do. I take some screenshot of the data. That was the idea for me, was make like a diagnostic of the area and try to understand how this data looks and what difference can I see if I map this nameplate capacity, that is like the possible capacity of the plants, versus this net generation, that's the actual generation that they produce in a specific year. So for example, here I'm showing, I didn't put the names, but here in the left, the big point, the big light blue point is the Northfield pumping storage station that shows with a lot of nameplate capacity in the left, but not with a very high net generation. Actually, it's a negative net generation in the left, because they use electricity to pump the water up, and then they release to sell when the prices are higher. So that was one of the first like analysis that I couldn't see in this visualization. You can actually see in the little graph below how the pumped storage technologies in general show a negative net generation. Another interesting topic for me was the increasing of the solar powers plants. Here you can see the comparison between 2012 and 2019, and it's actually very impressive how the photovoltaic plants are being created very intensively the last 5 years. And that's it. That's what part of the code, mostly my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sante, for introducing your data visualization to us and what you did in Tableau. And now the floor is John's, our last but not least speaker during the grad session.
Right. Let me just, this is going to be, can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So, and just sure, are you all seeing my screen? Yeah, okay, cool. So this is, I'm just going to present a couple of slides that are from my proposal presentation, which is still kind of in process. I'll be giving it on December 9th. So yeah, so let's hop into it. First, just as a title, I'll just show you all the title slides. So what I'm researching here is, we know that forests are going to shift their ranges, and the species composition and potentially structure of forests in the Northeast are going to be changing. We have decent information on kind of which species might be moving. And my main question is basically, how will the hydrological system respond to these changes in forest type? And that there's a chance that they won't respond. There won't be a big difference, but maybe there will be. So the first kind of objective of the study is to form a kind of baseline conditions, eco-hydrological conditions, and we'll use those as the kind of reference condition for the kind of future possible scenarios that the Northeast might encounter. Oh, and I should say my study area is New England broadly. So the second one is to look at how climate-induced forest shifts will affect hydrology, specifically like quantity and quality of water, and see if there will be any effects on the overall kind of water balance annually. The third one is to look at how land use induced kind of forest shifts will affect hydrology. So that could be, different forest management practices or conversion out of forest into something else, or any number of other uses like agricultural or whatnot. So to get into the kind of GIS part of this, what I'll be doing is I'll be using a number of different models. And the main one I'm going to be using is the soil and water assessment tool. which is called SWOT. And it seems like it's primarily used for a lot of different reasons. But what we do is we put into it certain input data like land use and topography, soils, and if you can get it, flow network data, but sometimes you have to generate that yourself using DEMs and stuff. And importantly, we'll be putting vegetation data into that. And for the first objective, we'll just kind of run the model with the current conditions. So we'll use kind of historical data from the recent past to kind of parameterize it at the start. And then once we want to start looking at how things are going to shift, we need a kind of general climate model to give us future predictions or estimations of what atmospheric and climate conditions will be like. So I'll be using CMIP, which I imagine some of you might have heard of. It's the coupled intercomparison modeling project, which pulls together over 20 different models created by scientists and engineers and used for a number of different reasons. And we'll input into that current temperature, wind speed, relative humidity, some location data, and then you can pick kind of which emission scenario you want it to output. So I'll be doing this analysis on 3 different emission scenarios. And I'll be doing it across a kind of medium and a long time scale. So 2050 to 2070 and 2070 to 2100. So once we have that, the CMIP data, we'll input that into our baseline SWOT model. So we'll switch around. Instead of using historical data with the SWOT model, we'll use the future potential conditions. And we'll also input into it the vegetation shift data. And it will output a number of maps. And these can be for different conditions, right? So you could do sediment loading or nutrient loading or flow, peak discharge, things about flow. And it has a number of integrations. It can be used with the SWOT viewer as it's kind of its own thing, but you can also use it with ArcGIS. Actually, you have to use it with ArcMap 10.7, I believe. And you can also use it with QGIS, which is pretty cool. So then I'll also be using, as part of the second objective, we'll be looking at fluvial dynamics and floodplain hydrology. And I'll be using HECRAS, which is the Hydrologic Engineering Center's river analysis system. It's primarily used for engineering purposes, but it can be used for kind of just general kind of environmental modeling as well. So that's what I'll be using for like flow data and stuff. And I think I'm reaching the end of my 5 minutes, so I should wrap it up quickly. But I just say to close it out that I'll be doing a similar process for the other objectives, but integrating land use data instead of just vegetation data. Yeah, and it should be a fun project, and it's going to take me about 5 years. So I have a lot of learning to do in that time. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, John. This really interesting presentation as well. And a big round of applause for all the presenters who just pitched the Grad Slam today. And I will be interesting and hopefully it works, takes you to the right form, but just evaluating the presentations. But meantime, we can have the questions, and please, Anne or Becky, if you would like to add anything, feel free to chime in too.
Just to follow up on what John said, 5 more years of research and 5 more years of GIS Grad Slam presentations.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have some actual maps to show next year.
John, are you doing PhD or it's just okay. In which department are you in?
Yeah, I'm in eco, I'm in environmental conservation. Yeah, under Dr. Randier.
Any questions from our audience?
Yeah, can I ask Stephanie a question? Is that allowed?
Sure.
I'm just curious. That sonar data output was so cool, was so interesting, and I'm just curious. I'm from around here. I'm from not far from where my little background is. That is the Connecticut River, and I'm curious if you found anything really surprising or just anything that you really didn't expect when you were doing that.
Yeah, so we've just done some preliminary work. So I'm a first year PhD student. So this is just some equipment testing we did over the summer. So I don't have any actual results yet beyond just what are the right settings to use for the sonar equipment. But one thing that I'm really curious about is how different the Connecticut River is going to be compared to habitats where they've been described in other places. And especially in Maine, it's the only place where they're found in lakes. It's obviously a very different type of habitat. So I'm really curious to see kind of which end of the spectrum they kind of end up being on.
I have another question for you, Stephanie.
Okay.
Can you hear me through my mask muffle?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I was just interested in knowing the age of the state data on the locations of the mussels and if you know how that gets collected.
Yeah, so we are getting all of their occurrence data, which is to say not very much. Typically, it comes from surveys that are done in response to a dam relicensing. And so it's a requirement that they survey for freshwater mussels. And because of those surveys, they've located the yellow lamp mussel. But usually people don't want to pay to do surveys without that kind of legal push. So it's fairly recent because yellow lamp mussels were only discovered in the Connecticut River in, I believe, 2005. So it's all from 2005 to current.
It's just on a as needed basis.
Yeah, exactly. But we hope to do some surveying eventually once we have the map. And we've located, they seem to really like this type of habitat. Let's look over here and see if we find a new population.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Stephanie, have you spoken to Holyoke Gas and Electric about the yellow lamp shell mussels? I know they had done the transmigration of them and also the survey. Full disclosure, I used to be the marketing director and did a whole bunch of stuff with it. So they should have a ton of information, or at least we used to pay a bunch of consultants to put stuff together and stand in the river with buckets and big.
Yeah. So we have some consultant reports that were given to the state. So all of our data comes from the wildlife agencies from Massachusetts and Connecticut. So yeah, we should have all those surveys from Holyoke Dam and others.
Oh yeah, but the utility actually paid for them tie and bond. So I don't know if they actually got given to the state or they were held by the utility because there was a license requirement that we had to manage the endangered species, but it was a post-license, not a relicensing requirement. I think it's still going on. It's under the Threatened and Endangered Species Plan. I can send you an email link.
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
I was going to ask another question to Stephanie. So I've seen ArcView and ArcMap, I'm sorry, very old versions. And I was wondering why I'm sorry. Is there a reason that you were using that?
Yeah, so those are actually not from my project. So those are taken from a paper where I derived my methods. So yes, I will be using a more recent version of ArcMap. But this is from a training from, I think, 2013. So yeah, a little too outdated for me.
So in the meantime, I was drawing myself. Because sometimes some devices just stick with the current version. So I was wondering if that's a particular reason. And I have another question for Vicente. First of all, Tableau is I just wanted to disclaim that Tableau is a public version that everybody can use unless they publish whatever they do. And for academic purposes, it's free for students with the UMS account. So feel free to just send an email and I will walk you through what the steps that you need to do in order to get a license. But as I said, Tableau Public enables free access, whatever Tableau. It has a certain learning curve, but I saw that you really enjoyed using Tableau. And I was wondering if you were going to relearn or like, what would you suggest for the people who are going to use Tableau? What are the things that you found most challenging and what are the things that made your life easier that you weren't able to do in ArcGIS Pro or QGIS?
Very good questions. Trying to make memory about when I made this assignment, I think the most challenging part for me was like set the timeline and to that option in the to make it easy to change the different years. I don't know, like I guess like what I suggest is to try to have like very clear data sets before introduced to Tableau. And double check if you're working with location, double check what is the projection that the data is built. Nothing more, I guess.
Thank you.
I'm also interested in your use of Tableau and wondering how the map part is used. Are you able to pull in certain backgrounds? And how do you feed in the data? Is it different from feeding geospatial data into ArcMap or QGIS?
Yeah, I feel like Tableau is much more user-friendly to visualize data. You just drag the columns that you want to use. In the case of the latitude, longitude, you just move the symbol of the column to the location option, and automatically that project and show the information. So it's pretty easy going. It's very intuitive. And the templates, Tableau have like a preset template. The preset template is like very nice, much more nicer than the preset colors and template that, for example, ArcGIS can give you, at least for me, aesthetically. And yes, the template that I use for the background was one of the choices, one of the options for Tableau. I guess you can upload, download on other templates there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for both Jean and Vicente related to, I guess, the way in which your two projects could interplay with each other. So we have a lot, at least in Massachusetts, a lot of clear cutting of forest areas for multi-acre generation scale solar sites, which in the short term is causing a lot of problems with the runoff. But as we look forward into, John, the 2050, which is a long time into the future, eventually those panels have a 40-year lifespan. They're going to be removed, and then probably something invasive is going to take over the former site of the solar plant. And yeah, I see some relation between your two projects, even though of a population of 3.
Yeah, I honestly don't really know much about those dynamics. I haven't really looked into kind of the solar world. I honestly, the land use effects on it is a kind of like, I'm trying to get started with the forest effects and then get into land use stuff. Although something I am interested in modeling is like forest succession and like the relative difference, hydrologically speaking, between like early successional, whatever, mid, late successional stuff. But yeah, I don't know much about that. I'd be curious to know if there were like long-term plans for solar fields. I didn't know they had like a 40-year lifespan. And I'd love to know if there are like, if the people who put these up have any plan for, you know, what happens after.
Yeah, you might want to ask Professor Berger in the eco department. He was the president of Mass, whoever gives out the solar incentive credits. He was in charge of those, but essentially, you know, their incentives are putting on agricultural land, cutting forest lands, which has been a bit of contention in the fact that you're taking lands that were intended for other uses and covering up the panels. But yeah, the panels don't last after 40 years. No one really talks about that. Either they're very cheap and they're going to break and there'll be condensation that will impact their generation, or they're just going to fail altogether. And that leaves the future of solar junk, which is another project that someone could probably look at.
I'll just piggyback off what Calvin just said. This is kind of a comment / question for Vicente mainly. I was taking a look at the Tableau maps that you had up there, and obviously it's clear that solar's kind of jumped off the rocker in the last 10 years or so. But that net generation number is astonishingly low, even for us who may be aware of the amount of energy and inputs it takes to create the panels. Was that something you were expecting to find, or is that just kind of a product of running these analyses? From what I'm seeing, it seems like solar is not necessarily the go-to renewable source at the moment in terms of limiting electricity consumption in the end.
I wasn't expecting nothing in particular, really. So I made this to act like an exercise, to be like a exploratory representation to see how it looks, all the plants, and find like interesting hotspots to analyze. So I didn't have like a previous understanding of what was like the distribution of the plants or any other information. But yes, that doesn't look like a very that make a very big impact in the net generation of the region, the photovoltaic technologies. I think that they are trying to promote more like offshore wind plant mostly, because that technology can really bring more megawatts to the grids.
And then I just had another follow-up. In terms of finding the energy expenditures that go into creating these various types of alternative fuel sources, where did you get that information? I mean, did you pull it directly? Are they publicly reporting how much energy they're using, or is this part of just an aggregate? Here's an average for each solar plant, let's say, and we'll aggregate it over all of them, or do they have individual recordings for each of them?
Yes, you have individual recording for each plant. This recording, you can also like this data set also contain much more information that I show. They show, for example, the amount of fuels and types of fuel that plants use, among other variables. And it's all public
Out in the ether, yeah.
Yes, it's all public. These two forms contain a lot of information, and they have this key column that you can use to join the different tables. So it's pretty easy going. It's kind of tricky. Sorry, it's kind of tricky. Like the different names changed with the years. So I made this analysis for 2012 to 2019, but actually the data go farther back to 2000s. So it can be bigger.
I might know what you're saying, Ian, is that most of Vicente's work on the net involved Northfield Mountain, which is very unique in the fact that it uses electricity to make electricity, whereas the solar panels themselves or the solar farms didn't have any electrical input going into them. There actually were no inputs, right, Vicente? Or most of the plants have no electrical input to them, other than station service, which is pretty minimal.
Right, the pumping storage is like pretty particular in relation with the rest of the plants, I guess. And it's very interesting to me how these two different variables shows in a very different ways for New England. So it was like to understand what I was working on.
Well, I think that your production is super informative, and I would love to see that same type of production 5 years in the future and see how things have changed. So.
I have one last question for John. Since we didn't have so many presenters, I think we have more time for Q&A. As a modeler who are interested in uncertainty and sensitivity analysis particularly, are you planning to do any type of analysis for your modeling approach? Because parameters might affect the output, whatever you're doing, for example, the forecasting in terms of climate change or land use change. Do you plan to do any uncertainty or sensitivity analysis during your PhD?
Yes, it's funny you say that, because I was in a stats lab right before this, and I was just thinking about that, and I was like, what kind of uncertainty analysis am I going to do? And it's something that I honestly haven't even really like gotten my feet wet with that yet. It's so early in this. I'm still like doing lit review, and I'm still like narrowing down like objectives and making sure my research gap, my like a knowledge gap that I'm focusing on is, as unstudied as it should be. So yes is the answer, but I honestly have no idea what it's going to look like yet. But if anyone has any recommendations, I'm happy to write them down, because who knows, maybe they'll come in really handy in like a few months, once I start getting into this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would love to have a conversation later on. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting to extend and look at the interactions among the parameters and how they affect the overall output. It will be really fascinating to understand about how your model works, how confident you can trust the results of those models.
Yeah, I know Dr. Randier was talking about trying to have like a 60-70% level of, I'm not exactly sure what that 60 or 70% sensitivity, I'm not sure which word it was that he used, but I know that even just getting SWOT up and running is going to take me like a year. So it's going to be a really long process, and I probably won't even really start it until like sometime in the kind of middle of next semester. So I got a lot of ways to go before I get there.
And that might be really hard to do sensitivity analysis, because you might need to run the model 1,000 times or something. So
yeah, I've been thinking about that, like computing power, like can my computer even handle this, but yeah, I'll find out soon.
Great. Any other comments from other participants? And I will repeat the link that I put on the chat for presenters. And since we recorded the meeting, I will upload it soon, so you'll have a chance to watch the presenters. And any other comments from our co-hosts? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating or Grad Slam, and thanks for great, excellent, fabulous researchers who contributed today. A round of applause from everybody. Okay, looking forward to see you all during the keynotes before that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, everyone.
you.
Thank you.